All right, welcome to Tuesday night, February 28th, our second session for the virtual section of our annual conference for TCSS. I've got here Don Smith with me from Studies Weekly. I'm going to talk about writing in the social studies using analysis tools and graphic organizers. So Don, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad you joined tonight. It's like I said, it's kind of a different situation where I get to have someone introduce me rather than me introduce myself. So I'm really glad to be here with y'all tonight. This was originally designed to be for kindergarten, first, second grade. It easily transfers to, third, fourth, and fifth grade. But I think middle school and high school can take something away from it. If in no other way, you'll be looking at what young learners are doing that are trying to prepare them for middle school and the high school students that you'll get later on. So let me just start with the little presentation I have, if you'll hold on for a second. And let me start with this flip book. I don't know if y'all have used this very much before. I kind of came across it as a new way to present information rather than just a PowerPoint. It's a flip book that you can create. It starts with a PowerPoint that you change the screen size to be more of an 8.5 by 11 representation, and then you save it as a PDF and you can load it up as a flip book. You can embed videos in it. You can embed audio clips. And I think it's a really kind of a different way to present information to kids as well as adults. So that being said, if anybody's interested in that, put it in the chat and I'll give you the link. It's really easy. If I can do it, I promise you anyone can put something like this together. So let's get started. First of all, let me just tell you a little bit about me. I am a 25-year educator. Kind of sounds weird to say that. I've taught kindergarten, first grade, fourth grade. I've also been a science and social studies curriculum specialist for the district that I was in with 35 elementary schools. So I have kind of a broad background of what education should look like from a teacher's perspective and then from an administrative perspective as well. I'm the mother of 3 grown boys, and I most recently have had a brand new granddaughter. It looks like we're just going to get girls on the grandchildren's side, and that is my 3-year-old granddaughter holding her 2-week-old sister that was born right in the middle of the Super Bowl, much to her father's disgust, but that's when she arrived. As teachers, we have a commitment, and listening to this, the earlier session, it really kind of piggybacks on that. We have a commitment to give every learner a place and a voice at the table. We want to bring out the best in all kids in our classrooms through conversations, because we know that every child has a story, and we want them to have the opportunity to share that story. We want them to be able to share it with us as well as with their peers. And sometimes those stories differ based on the demographics in our classrooms. Now, one of the things that elementary teachers struggle with is getting kids to talk. Like, how are we going to have those conversations? And how do we encourage children to start talking in our classroom? Well, what we're going to focus on today is connecting writing to the standards and practices that are found in the Tennessee Social Studies Standards. And doing that, how do we start creating that culture of inquiry? Well, I would like for y'all to do just a little bit of a self-assessment, because some of the things that I kind of want to focus on are you intentionally regarding those social studies practices in your classrooms? Are you grappling with inquiry? Are you intentionally planning for collaborative conversations? Because those things don't just happen organically in kindergarten, first and second grade. You kind of have to plan for it. When you do have those collaborative conversations, are they centered around meaningful resources? Are you using really good primary and secondary resources to do that? Are you modeling the use of graphic organizers? And I know that sounds kind of like a crazy thing to add in here, but as kids are sharing ideas, they need a way to document their thinking and the thinking of others. And usually this is most easily done with graphic organizers. Sometimes it's just something as simple as an anchor chart, but we do like to kind of use some of those graphic organizers to intentionally organize information in different ways. And then are we giving students that opportunity to write and share those stories? And are those opportunities done daily? Are they done a couple of times a week? Are they done weekly? Or are they done several times a month? And I'm not making a judgment call on how often writing is done. I know in a perfect world, we would write every day, but sometimes that's not possible. Like most times that's not possible. If you're able to do that in your classroom, I'm going to, celebrate you today. I wish I was able to do that in the classroom, but if I got it in a couple of times a week, I felt like I was a rock star. So what I'm going to ask you or charge you with is that how are you growing that craft? Like that craft in your classroom, specifically those collaborative conversations, using those meaningful resources, modeling with graphic organizers and gradually releasing students to do those on their own, and then having those opportunities to write. How can you grow that part of your instructional day? And you're going to have to hold on one second. I have a dog in here who's begging to be petted, and he's going to have to be dismissed. Go. Kind of like having a child a little bit. So I want you to kind of think about that, because I think those are really easy ways that teachers can grow their craft. So if you would, I put in a link right here to a Jamboard. I tried to make it into a bit.ly so it'd be a little bit easier to copy. But it's https://bit.ly/TCSS 2023. And if you would go ahead and open up that Jamboard, I'm going to go to it myself. And I really want you to comment, if you would, on slides 2 through 6 to start with. We're going to use this Jamboard periodically during this session today, and that is not the one I want you to start with. But I want you to start at the beginning, where we have those opportunities to grow. And if you would, get one of these little sticky notes over here and kind of look at those bullet points over there on the left. Get yourself a little sticky note. Just go over here and click. Pick your favorite color. I'm going to go with Tennessee Orange for this example. And I'm going to pull this down here, and I'm going to edit it. I'm going to put my name on it. And when I look at that list, I see that there are about 4 things on there that I think I do pretty well. Like, I feel like I kind of grapple with inquiry. I think I try to intentionally regard those practices. I'm pretty good at identifying a pretty good source. And I do like to give my students plenty of opportunities to write. So if you would, kind of on that little sticky note, how do you, when you look at that list, where do you see yourself falling in there? And you know what? This group is so small. I don't mind if you unmute yourself and kind of share in this conversation. Can you put that link in the chat again? I sure can, Karen. Hold on. Let me go back and look at it. Let me see if I can do that.
I put it in there for you, Don.
Can you?
Yeah.
Thanks. You're a lifesaver. Now, Josh, I know you and Dylan are middle school and high school. So tell me what this kind of looks like in a upper grade environment.
Well, I'm actually college now, but
Well, anybody. I'm just trying to have kind of a conversation going on here. Karen, you're did I hear you say earlier you're 4th grade?
Yeah, she said she taught fourth grade.
Sorry, I
Marie.
couldn't find Zoom.
That's okay. Don't worry. If you're like me, I have like
I got
9
it.
tabs.
Yeah, I teach fourth grade, and I will say that I do all of these things except provide enough writing opportunities.
It's hard. Don't
Yeah.
judge yourself too harshly on that.
Well, I don't because of time. I
I
mean,
know.
you know, and my kids are so good at collaborative conversation because we do it on a daily basis. I also teach science, so I use a lot of inquiry and data collection and primary sources and investigation in both in my social studies and my science. So it kind of overlaps nicely.
So I have a question, and this is and I'm really curious about this. So your kids do really well in collaborative conversations. Did they come to you at the beginning of the year doing well in that, or was that something you needed to develop with them?
Yes and no. In the beginning of the year, they have to learn how to make it collaborative and democratic. And
Okay.
the problem is they like to talk too much. And so we have to learn what true conversation is, and then how to work together to collaborate and share and build on other people's ideas. So yes, they came wanting to talk, but no, I had to train them how to make it a good, productive. And what we do is bounce between small group conversation and whole group. And that way I can model or bring them back to where they need to be. And that helps them learn to do it on their own.
Awesome. Miranda and Karen, I think you both said that you were in that K-5 arena. How does that look for y'all? And when you look at this little bullet pointed list over here on the left, what are the things you want to celebrate about yourself before we move on?
Well, I've talked enough. I'm gonna let Miranda talk.
And Renee, that was it. Renee, I think you were elementary too.
Yes, ma'am. Fourth grade.
Okay.
And so would you repeat that question, please?
Sure. When you look at that list of things there, like you're looking at the social studies practices, you're trying to embed inquiry, you're building, trying to encourage your students to have collaborative conversations, look at resources, use graphic organizers, and then write. How successful, and well, I shouldn't say it that way because that sounds like we're trying to judge each other. But what do you want to celebrate that you feel like you see working really well in your classroom?
So what we're kind of in a fix at our school. We have about maybe 25 minutes at the end of the day for social studies and science. And so the celebrating is that you have to be intentional, with that kind of time. You have to be very intentional. And the kids, I've taught them at the beginning of the year to use student accountability frame. And so we use those, and they've memorized a lot of those frames. And so after spending, a couple of days on the lesson and talking about the lesson, then I move into the graphic organizers. And sometimes we're out of time and we have to talk about the information on the graphic organizer, and I don't write as much as what I should.
Well, I'm just going to extend you a little mercy here. Don't say it quite that way. You write as much as you probably can during that amount of time. And I do a lot of professional development all across the country. And what you're saying about time is probably what I hear from 99% of the teachers, regardless of the state you're in. Science and social studies are at the end of the day when children are exhausted, when teachers are exhausted, and we're trying to cram all those standards into a block of anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes. And oftentimes those two content areas are flip-flopping. Like it might be 2 to 4 weeks of science and then flipping and doing 2 to 4 weeks of social studies. So it's kind of hard to get a lot of momentum, especially as far as writing going, when you're sharing that small amount of time with two content areas at the time of day it's occurring. So it sounds like to me you're doing a pretty good job of that. I do want to ask some of the people that are here from high school and middle school. Tell us what that looks like with some of these older children, students. Because y'all are at least in a departmentalized environment where you're teaching one content for a larger block of time. So I would think that you're able to be a little bit more successful with some of the things we have bullet pointed over here on the left. Anybody want to share?
I can share. This is Reed Brewer. I teach at Farragut Middle. I teach 7th grade now, but I taught 6th grade for about, well, past 7 years, but I've been teaching about 20 years. But
Okay.
so we do, there's been different things I've done over the years. We have done some writing collaboration. I've collaborated with language arts before. We would, like one of the big ones we did was the Jewish diaspora, and we wrote about it, and I graded all the content and they graded over the language arts. But then we also, before, we'd allow the kids to write and then kind of pair share. You go and read and make sure, you know, what I'm trying to say is what we're saying. That's worked well before in the past. Depends on the group. Sometimes that's not worked so well. Like I have 2 honors classes right now that could handle stuff like that. My 2 non-honors classes, it wouldn't gone over very well currently. And not all non-honors classes would that not work with the group I've got right now. Just not. It would be about half the class would get, about half the class would not get it. Anyhow, it's so long.
Right.
Other things I've done in the past. We have done discussions. There's a lot of pair share with them, go back and forth. I've not done a whole lot of Socratic seminars with them. We've done them years ago. I did some of those, but it's not really my style. But so they usually, like, we do a giant mural at the end of the year. They work with that and they have to plan together. They work, and that works really, really well. But it's also at the very end of the year when they've had all year to kind of learn how they are, and they do get to semi choose their group.
Gotcha.
They work that with.
Well, I'm going to say that it looks different. Everything that you're describing looks so different in a 3-5 environment. It looks different than a middle school, and I'm sure it looks way different than it is in high school. But imagine some of these teachers that are teaching kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, trying to get children that maybe don't have a lot of collaborative conversation going on in their own home to come to school and share ideas. Like a teacher can have all these great plans about what they want to teach and what they want, to share with their kids and what they want that conversation to sound like. And they'll share a source and they'll ask something as simple as, what do you see? And all they get are blank looks back. Often it's because these kids aren't having conversations at home. So when the teacher says, tell me what you think, tell me more, they're almost paralyzed because they don't know how to have a conversation. And this is one of the things that teachers are seeing in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade. I'm sure it's still going on in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. You have a lot of students that are kind of experiencing that, but they don't know what that conversation looks like or how to have that conversation. And teachers, and I know I've done it because I taught kindergarten and I taught 1st grade, we make assumptions about what students bring to the table. Like we expect them to talk about something that they really don't understand. And I'll give you a perfect example that sounds so silly, but I felt very silly when it happened. 1st grade, one of the standards is, and I live in Georgia, is identifying the United States flag and the Georgia flag. Well, that didn't seem like a very meaty standard to me. You just identify it, point to it, United States, Georgia. But what I did was I started with an image of the United States flag, and I asked students to identify what that image was. I was shocked that so many students were not able to identify it, number one, as just a flag, like, oh, it's a flag. And number two is the United States flag. When I started thinking about it, I realized that, oh, some of my boys knew about flags if they played flag football, and some of my kids that watched NASCAR with a family member knew something about flags. But as far as being able to generally identify it as the United States flag, that not very many were able to. I started thinking about it and I thought, well, actually, where do they see a flag? If it is not in their classroom and it hasn't been pointed out, and again, we're talking about kindergarten and first grade who hasn't been saying the Pledge of Allegiance, for 6 or 7 years. If they get to school at the wrong time, they don't see a flag outside of the school. It might not have been, put up on the pole yet. If they leave at a certain time, the flag may have already come down. Other places that you typically see a flag might be the post office. Not a lot of kids go to the post office. The government building in different towns. Not a lot of young kids go to the government building. So when I really started thinking about it, I thought, why would I just assume that they recognize this artifact? And when that happened to me, it kind of changed the way that I use images in my classroom. Now, again, what I prepared today was really for that K2 teacher, but I think we can all appreciate this experience as we go through it. And I'm going to skip some of the other slides because I think we've kind of discussed this and I didn't know how big of a group to anticipate. So I wanted to make it a little bit more collaborative. But I want you to look at this image or this part of this image, because this is a practice I started using in my classroom. And I think it would transfer to any grade level, even high school. But I started with this image and I asked my students to tell me what they saw. But the directions were, I want facts and only facts. I don't want any inferences made. So don't start telling me what you think it is. Just tell me what you see. And then we used one of two different kinds of graphic organizers, either like a circle map where we could just list all the information. And then when we decide what it is, we'll put that name in the middle of that circle. But right now we're just going to do a brain dump of things we see. Or we could use a see-think model. And we start with, what do you see? Facts and only the facts. What do you think you're looking at? After we look at the whole image, what do you think you're looking at? And then finally, what questions do you have? Now, if you've done anything with visible thinking or Harvard's Project Zero, this See, Think, Wonder strategy is probably a strategy you've used before. So just looking at this image, somebody unmute and tell me what you see in this little panel of this picture, or what do you think you see? All right, well, what does this look like right here? Somebody unmute.
I'm going to say it's going to be, from what I can see, it's either going to be a foot or a hand of some sort of animal.
Well, what's the evidence? What do you see?
It's
The
very,
evidence, oh yeah, good call. The evidence I see right here, what seems to be a palm or a foot pad of some sort to me.
Okay, but what makes you think that? What makes you think that?
What makes me think that? The lines and the kind of the wrinkles are the patterns on that.
Okay, so if you were a 5 or 6 year old, what you might say is, I see some lines.
Mm-hmm.
I see some different colors, tan and yellow and brown. I see something right here that maybe looks like hair. It looks like there is a blanket or something, a piece of cloth down here. And one of the strategies that I use for really young learners is I tell them to look for 10 seconds, and I want them to identify or to be able to list 4 things they noticed. And when they're ready, to put up 4 fingers. So I look around waiting until I see everybody with 4 fingers up. We're going to share. What? Is someone yelling at me? But anyway, we're going to share as long as people have fingers up. But if your partner or your neighbor mentions one of the things that you were going to mention, put a finger down. So what I typically see is we'll start out with 4 fingers, and then somebody notices some lines, and somebody notices some little, maybe hair. Somebody noticed somebody noticed the blanket. I have that finger up. And I'll notice they start to put more fingers up, because the way this works is you can look again and see other things. As long as you're noticing something, I'm going to call on you. So they could notice they see black, they see tan, they see blue, they see lines, they see something with a curved edge. What I'm really trying to train them to do is look closely at an image, not just to make a decision about what they see, but to really dig in and look for details. Then after we look, kind of dig everything we can out of that panel, and there's not a lot there, we will advance and we'll look at the middle panel, and then we'll talk about what we see there. And as they notice things, we're going to add it to one of these graphic organizers, either on the outside ring of this circle map or in this first little column that's listed, what do you see? And then after we kind of drill down and look at everybody's listed everything or shared everything they notice, it looks like there might be a star right here because all these lines intersect. We can see 1, 2, maybe 5 little appendages coming off, and we're going to list those things. And then finally, we go to that last little panel where you see what looks like fingers and nails. And whoever said it was like the palm of an animal, you were great. That was right. We'll finally show the whole image. And the reason I picked this is because I didn't know this, but the state animal in Tennessee and the standard in first grade is to identify Tennessee symbols, including the state flag, tree, flower, bird. And in case y'all didn't know, the raccoon is the state animal of Tennessee. So we're going to talk about this animal's appendage and identify it as a raccoon, and then compare it to the hand of a human. How are they alike and how are they different? So what makes a raccoon so, unusual and interesting? Now I'm doing a couple of things here. I'm addressing that social studies standard about the state animal. I'm also doing a little bit of a science lesson because we're talking about those oppositional thumbs and what makes a raccoon such an unusual animal. First of all, look how long his fingers are and his claws are, but it really doesn't look completely different than a human hand. And we're like, look at the lines and the joints in it. So my students are going to notice those things. That's going to give me an opportunity to pull up a different kind of graphic organizer where I compare and contrast those 2 images of similarities and differences. So again, I'm kind of doing that cross-curricular teaching because I've got the speaking and listening standards there and writing standards, and we're talking a little bit about social studies and a little bit about science. Another image that I could do this, or another way I could do this, is I could start by covering a whole image up. And I'm going to tell my students, we're going to be an image detective. I want you to put on your detective hats. Again, what I'm trying to do is get kids to slow down and not just make assumptions about images that are shared in the classroom, but to really look for the details about what is being told with this image. And again, this is going to kind of piggyback on the story I told you earlier. I've covered up this rectangular image. I'm going to use the graphic organizer to collect what my students notice, but I'm not going to show them the entire image at one time. Looking at an image all at one time is a little bit like asking kids to decode complex text without breaking it into parts. We wouldn't ask kids to do that. We want them to kind of break it apart and make sense of different paragraphs, sentences or paragraphs, and then kind of put it all together. Same thing is true for an image. So I might start by covering this image up and only showing this far right piece. And I'm going to ask my kids what they notice. And here are the things that I'm going to hope that they're going to do with a little bit of modeling. They see a blue rectangle. And that rectangle has 4 sides, 2 pairs of parallel lines, two of the sides are longer and two of the sides are shorter. And again, when we're talking about that lower K1-2 grade band, we're still talking about geometric shapes. We're talking about parallel lines, and we're talking about different vocabulary lines. That is a cube, a square, a rectangle, whatever you want to call it, but we're getting into those geometric shapes. After we talk about this little blue line, we're going to talk about this shape over here. That's a rectangle. It's a red rectangle. In the middle of that red rectangle is a round circle. And again, we're going to talk about these rectangular shapes. Two longer sides, two shorter sides, they're parallel. It's just a larger rectangle than this blue rectangle. And then after we talk about that and move on and keep adding information to this describing chart. Now, when you use a chart like this, it's usually just individual words or couple of words that go in there. And then finally, we're going to look at the middle part of that circle where the 3 stars are. So instead of just putting the Tennessee flag up there, I'm going to unpack that image so that my students are really, rather than just showing them the flag and identifying it, they understand that there is a blue rectangle on one side of the flag. There's a larger red rectangle. In the middle of that is a white circle with a blue circle in the middle and 3 white stars, 5 pointed stars. And those stars kind of mirror each other. And then the one at the bottom kind of has the feet on the bottom and it's kind of standing up. Now they're going to use their own vocabulary words, but this is a really good way to develop vocabulary and to have students really being able to describe what the flag looks like rather than just say, oh, that's a Tennessee flag. So looking at this again, this is kind of prepared for a K1-2 audience. Tell me how you have these conversations in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade and in middle school, and how does that look different? And what do you struggle with when you ask students to look at an image, to decode what they're looking at, and then to transfer that information either into a graphic organizer, which I hope you're using first, and then ultimately into writing. So tell me how this happens in your classroom, if someone wouldn't mind unmuting and sharing that.
One thing that we do is I teach 6th grade and ancient history. So we'll have students look at an image of a particular civilization before we start that unit, and then have them focus on one piece at a time. So focus on the people, focus on the architecture, focus on the geography, so that they're a little bit more, kind of reins them in a little bit, and they don't get as overwhelmed with the entire image. So I've found that helps. As 6th graders do, they get distracted by everything else that they see and they want to comment on whatever they think is the coolest. But we try to kind of limit it that way to help sort of focus their thinking.
That's and I'm so glad you shared that, because I had not thought about doing that, like categorizing what it is you want them to look at, because I know sometimes, and I don't know if I'm the only person that does this, I'm sure I'm not. I might be in a museum looking at a piece of art, and it will usually be a scene and there'll be a lot going in it, and I'm like mesmerized by it, but it's really overwhelming to make sense of what I'm looking at. My strategy is to start at the left and move to the right, kind of like, probably because that's the way I read too, but to look at that image in little micro panels moving from left to right. But I think it's also useful, like you said, just to notice first maybe the people, and then maybe the parts of nature in that image, or artifacts that are included in there, so that you are, like you said, reining them in and they're not getting overwhelmed and just throwing the most random, outlandish, observation, that they notice in the story, just to usually get attention in some way. So doesn't really turn into a collaborative conversation. It turns into a who can say the craziest thing situation, which is really what we don't want it to be. My elementary people, tell me how you use images in your classroom.
This is Karen again.
That's great.
I do sort of what the high school teacher does by breaking it down. I have a 4-square graphic organizer, and it does sort of what you said. There's one square for people, there's one for objects, there's one for geographic or physical surroundings, and then there's an other. And so what I do is have them just do one square at a time, and also break the image down into smaller parts.
Great. I'm gonna I don't know if y'all have seen this before, but I'm really kind of excited to show you something that I think might be useful based on some of the things that you just said. And I'm going to skip some of these because I kind of just want to talk about something here. Have you all gone to DocTeach? It's part of the National Archives. Has anybody here used any of the primary source analysis tools from DocTeach?
I've used primary sources analysis tools from somewhere, but I can't remember where I got them.
All right, I'm going to encourage y'all, and it is not going to matter if you are elementary, middle, or high, to go to DocTeach. It, like I say, it's part of the National Archives. You will have to create an account, but that's okay. And once you create that account, they have primary source analysis tools for photographs, documents, artifacts, posters like political posters, maps, cartoons, videos, sound recordings, and artwork. And what I like about these is they ask students to look for things that are very particular to maybe a photograph or a map. And let me see if I can. Now, obviously, I work for a vendor. I work for Studies Weekly. Studies Weekly has a collection of graphic organizers that look very similar to these. In fact, we got permission from DocTeach to create our own. I want to show you one so you can see what I'm talking about, but you can also go to DocTeach and pull up theirs. And I think they will really help you with some of those conversations when y'all are looking at those artifacts. So let me show you what one looks like. And again, I'm not trying to sell a product. I just have this example to use, and I think it's really, let me pull up the one for a map. Cartoon document map. Here we go. Now, the difference in these and the ones that you will be able to pull up with DocTeach are just that there's more color because they're primary, and they are just kind of organized in a different way. But you'll notice, just like See, Think, Wonder, it has this stop and look where we're just looking at attributes, and then Think and Give Evidence. And then at the bottom, there is a tab. I'm trying to make it a little bit smaller. It's going to take a minute, where you can ask questions. But what I like about this is it starts with we're analyzing a map. So it's starting with really simple questions like, is that map black or white, or is it color? And students just check one or the other. Then, is there a title? And if so, what is this map called? There may not be a title. And then, are any of these icons evident on the map? Is there a compass rose? Is there a legend? Is there a scale? We know that not all maps will have these on there. Now, a good map will, but not all maps do. And then finally, are there rivers, lakes, or bodies of water like an ocean? Are there landforms like mountains? Do we see that there's states, countries? Are there cities, capitals? Are there any borders or boundaries? This really encourages students to look at that map really closely and try to make sense of what they're looking at. And then in the Think and Give Evidence part, it says, When do you think the map was drawn? What's your evidence? Now, it could be that they think the map was drawn a long time ago because it's black and white, or maybe the compass rose that's included on the map doesn't point north, or maybe the map's orientation is not that the top of the map is north and the left side of the map is west or east, or however you're doing it, looking on a screen. But it could, older maps sometimes oriented the way that the sailor would see the land when they arrived on the land. So the map might be drawn in a different orientation. And then what place or places are represented, what's your evidence, what can you infer by the way the map is drawn, and what's your evidence. And then down at the bottom, there's some questions like what could have been added to the map to help you make sense of it. Well, if there wasn't a title would have helped. If there wasn't a year included on the map, like when the map was drawn, that certainly would be helpful. And then what other questions do you have? So using a tool like this, an analysis tool like this, really helps give kids something to talk about, because they're talking about these attributes specifically of a map. And it also gives them an organization for that conversation. We're going to start with the things that we observe. Then we're going to make some inferences based on some evidence. And then we're going to have the opportunity to ask any questions that we might have. So if you were a K-2 teacher in Tennessee that used Studies Weekly, these would be provided for you. If you're not, then I would encourage you to go to DocTeach and look at some of these, because I think they really help support those conversations and helping every kid have a voice. The other thing I want to mention, and I kind of want to talk about because I'm really curious about this, what this looks like in different classrooms, is the use of graphic organizers. So if you could, in that third, fourth, fifth grade group, can you talk a little bit about graphic organizers and what those organizers look like in your classroom? And then I'll make a confession about myself and the use of graphic organizers. But could somebody kind of tell me what that looks like? Middle school and high school, I'm interested in that from you as well, if you don't mind sharing. Well, while y'all get ready to share, I'm going to make a confession. As a younger teacher, and this was a while ago, I had a whole folder full of graphic organizers that I used with my fourth graders. When it was spring, we had graphic organizers with flowers on them. Like it was a piece of artwork that was allegedly a graphic organizer. All my kids wanted to know was, when can we color? Sometimes we use the hamburger one. Again, all they wanted to know is, when can we color it? If I was teaching insects, I had one that looked like a butterfly, and we would have main idea and supporting detail and describing words and, parts of insects or whatever. But the graphic organizer was really a piece of artwork that they added information to. And then one day I realized that my kids did not know how to use a graphic organizer, because in their mind, I was providing them this piece of artwork that they had to put information on, but really what they were looking forward to was coloring it. When could they color it? So I started doing on this kind of journey of about how should graphic organizers be used and what am I doing wrong? Because ideally, what I want my kids to do is be able to organize information, use that information to write, but move to a level of automaticity where they don't need that printed graphic organizer to be able to organize their ideas. They either can draw lines on paper, or they can do a brain dump, or they draw their own graphic organizer on the paper. They can recreate it, but I don't have to print all these things out. And when I started studying that, I came across a source. It's called Thinking Maps. And one of the main takeaways from that was that graphic organizers are not intended to be artwork. They have a really specific purpose. If you're doing a brain dump, you use a circle map. If you're describing something, you might use a bubble map. And in these circles are going to be attributes. If you are doing example or non-example, it could be this generalization. It's either living or non-living. It's either past or present. I might use a sequencing map. I might do input output, like cause and effect, this Venn diagram that compares, or parts to whole. Now, you can look at a lot of different places all over the internet, and you'll come up with different collections of graphic organizers. I think Thinking Maps probably has some of the best ones, but you'll notice there's no artwork in it. And the examples we see here are graphic organizers that students have drawn because they've been in that gradual release model where they used the printed graphic organizer that the teacher provided. And eventually the teacher took that away and said, okay, what are you doing? Are you just brain dumping information? Well, then you're going to draw a circle map. Are you looking for attributes? Then a bubble map. Are we looking at parts to whole? Then a tree map. So teaching students how to be really intentional in the way that they organize information helps them become better writers. So I don't know what graphic organizers look like in your classroom, but if you would like to bump that game up a little bit and maybe move from using a graphic organizer that your students are really primarily interested in decorating to something that really teaches them a skill for organizing information, I would encourage you maybe to go to Thinking Maps, look at some of theirs, but also look at some of the other collections of graphic organizers that are not founded in artwork. So I'm always interested in this concept about graphic organizers. So could someone kind of share an idea or share some information about how you're using it successfully, or maybe where you're kind of being challenged about a way to use them?
Dawn, thank you for that confession, because beforehand, I
have a lot of them.
Admit that I don't copy the pretty ones. And so I thought, oh dear, everybody's going to think I'm terrible because I literally make my kids draw a graphic organizer. And so depending on the skill or the lesson, it could be the brain dump. And I would tell them, hey, when I like present an image, I'm going to present, like the War of 1812, I'll show an image to get them interested, in what can we learn from the image. So I'll tell them the graphic organizer, and then sometimes I'll ask, hey, today we're going to talk about the Civil War. So we're going to talk about this group and this group. What kind of graphic organizer do you think I would need to record our information on today? And they will say, oh, maybe a timeline. I'm like, yes, good idea. But what if I wanted to compare the two groups? Oh, then maybe a Venn diagram. So, sometimes I will make them think through the types of information and have them decide what kind of graphic organizer. And then I'll ask, well, how would I draw that? What would it look like?
I am so excited to hear you say that, because I'm going to tell you, I struggled with graphic organizers, and I went through a period where I was like, well, I don't see the importance of them because they can't use them on a test. I took that approach to it even. And then finally, like I say, I just had this epiphany. I thought, this isn't working, not because graphic organizers don't work. I thought, I've been using graphic organizers all my life. I make shopping lists. So that's a form of graphic organizer. So I know that they're important. I know that everyone uses them. I'm just using the tool inappropriately. And once I kind of accepted that, took ownership of being what was the problem with it, it changed. And giving students the autonomy to make those kinds of decisions about how they need to organize information really takes them to owning their learning and making those decisions. So I'm really excited to hear that that's working well for you in your class. Has anybody struggled with this? Is anybody on the struggle bus like I used to be? And if you are, there's hope for you. That's all I'm going to say. Just do a little bit of personal, professional development, and they work. They work for writing, and it works to give students the confidence to write. I don't know what writing looks like in high school. I can tell you what it looks like very often in elementary school. And the way I describe it is it looks like someone vomited on paper. Like all the information's there, but it is not, there's no way to make sense of what's there because it's not organized. And I think using graphic organizers really intentionally takes that writing from that vomited information to really helping them make sense of what they're trying to communicate. Writing is the most sophisticated form of communication there is, and helping kids be confident about that is really something that we can help them do. So we have about 10 minutes left. I think I felt like, following up on that AP session, I felt a little bit insecure. I was like, gosh, I'm talking about really basic stuff here. And we've been talking about college level AP, classes. So thank you for kind of hanging with me and extending me a little bit of mercy and being patient with me. I am a big proponent of using primary source analysis tools to help those kids who struggle with that, and then using graphic organizers really intentionally. So I appreciate your time today. I think we can stop recording if we want to.
All right. Well, thank you.